We go over more Zach Lowe audio. Would you trade LaMelo Ball or at least shop him around? What could you get in return? We'll also play some draft games today on Locked On Hornets.
You are Locked On Hornets, your daily Charlotte Hornets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
It's Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free and available anywhere you get your pods, and that includes YouTube. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Can't wait for Bet the Buzz on FanDuel this season. We stick to it so much. There's the curator of Bet the Buzz, Doug Branson, also the curator of Every Hornets Boxscore.com. I'm Walker Mail. Listen to me on WFNZ every weekday from 12 to 3 p.m. You want to lead off with some LaMelo Ball convo that always gets the people going on YouTube and elsewhere?
We have it on our rundown. Lead with LaMelo or Mark or Brandon. You know, it's the core. They've told us that's the core. Too often we end up leading with Miles Bridges, but today we're going to lead with LaMelo.
Okay, let's lead with LaMelo. It's not what Zach Lowe and Jonathan Givony did in their conversation on the Lowe Post pod. We just broke down some of their comments about the Hornets and the situation they're in, the draft, all that stuff yesterday. But today, I want to get to Lowe's comments on some of the things he was hearing around the league. If people inside front offices, not GMs, but just NBA front office people, if they were to interview for the GM job, whatever that means, if they were to interview for the Charlotte Hornets GM or vice president of personnel, vice president of basketball operations, whatever title you want to give what Jeff Peterson got, right? If you were interviewing for that job title, what would you want to do? What would you make known to ownership, Rick Schnall and Gabe Plotkin, before you got that job? And here's what he said he heard around the league.
You know, a couple months ago when Charlotte was in the quote-unquote front office hiring process that ended with Jeff Peterson, I had front office executives from other teams, so just sort of spitballing the way you do in conversations, sort of like I would ask them, just what would you do if the Hornets interviewed you? Like, what would you do if you got called in? None of these guys got called in. We're just shooting the breeze. And a few of them said, I would go into owners, I would go into Plotkin and Schnall and say, step one, I'm investigating the trade value for LaMelo Ball. I'm going to see if we can get some team to give us an absolute Godfather offer of unprotected picks and swaps, bottom out next year, try and get Cooper Flag, whatever. But like step one is going to be, I'm kind of resetting the LaMelo Ball thing. You know, that's easy to say. And I don't know that there would be a Godfather offer out there. Maybe there would, maybe there wouldn't. You know, I get the foibles. I get that he hasn't been healthy, and that's been the number one thing. He just hasn't been healthy. I'm not rushing to get out of the LaMelo Ball business quite yet if I'm Charlotte.
Have we ever heard the term Godfather offer surrounding Zach Lowe before, Doug? Ring any bells?
And the Hornets? No, I've never heard of it. Oh, except for that one time that we could not escape it. It was like a black hole, that Godfather offer that the Hornets turned down and instead took Frank Kaminsky.
That's right.
Or did they really turn it down? Did it ever exist? Yeah, I mean, Godfather offer, get out of here. He lost me with that. He also threw a foibles in there, which he got me back. He lost me with the Godfather and then pulled me back in with the foibles because I love some foibles.
He's good. He's good at that. I figured you would like that. If you were to tell me, Walker, what is Doug going to like most about this quote, I would have said that exact same thing. I know you way too well. Yeah, we played some of this yesterday. But I'm totally with Zach Lowe on this. I'm not out of the LaMelo Ball business yet either. I absolutely think it's well worth your while to see what a healthy LaMelo and Brandon Miller can do. No, there is no guarantee whatsoever that LaMelo will be healthy. But I do want to see what those two guys can look like in the backcourt. And I think also with his age, with the ability we've already seen, it's not like it's this untapped potential where, hey, who knows? Maybe it could happen, but we don't know for sure. No, it could, because it did happen. We got to an all-star appearance and we got to a Rookie of the Year award season. So that all matters. And the fact that we've seen that play out on the court, that's why that's not the first thing I'm taking care of. For sure. I don't know if LaMelo is untradeable. I don't know if he doesn't have that mark, but that's not the first thing I'm doing if I get this job that Jeff Peterson did before the season ended.
I don't know if it's the first thing that I'm doing. And I think that Zach Lowe, I'm pretty much on the same page as you and Zach, especially the part where Zach says, it's easy to say that you would come in and trade the player that you just gave, that you didn't, but that the previous regime just gave a max contract to. That is, still popular with the fan base, despite the foibles and despite the injuries. People still want to pay to see LaMelo Ball play. And, over the course of this franchise post move to New Orleans, they haven't had a ton of players outside of Kemba Walker that really fit that bill of like, oh, this is a guy I will actually pay money to come and see that is not going to see LeBron James or going to see the opponent that is playing inside the Spectrum Center. So you have to weight that somewhat. But where I'm slightly off of the page with both of you is I think while it doesn't need to be the first thing you do, I think and I hope that Jeff Peterson has been gauging what the value of LaMelo Ball is around the league in preparation for more foibles or preparation for more injuries or preparation for adjusting this team around Brandon Miller. Look, we don't exactly know what the LaMelo Brandon fit. It seems like it's going to be perfect, but what if it isn't? Or what if other players you bring in? What if it doesn't start to work anymore and you've got to make some moves? I think it's on Jeff Peterson to come in and evaluate what the market is for him now. I suspect that if he's made those calls, first of all, you better trust that those calls don't leak. But if you've made those kind of calls or made some kind of indication that you want to see what that value is, I suspect that the value is not going to be very high, which is why it's kind of ridiculous for these front office insiders to want to come in and do that, because I think they know good and well that if you called around the league on Ball, everybody's going to go, I don't know. I mean, we just haven't seen injuries. There's a lot that's going to suppress that value. And so trading him now honestly makes zero sense. But finding out what the value is and staying in tune with that, I think is extremely valuable.
Yeah. And I think you could say that about literally every player in the league. What is the value for every player? Some it's easier to know, right? I want Jeff Peterson to know what the value is for Brandon Miller right now. I want him to know what it is for every single player on the roster. When we do this convo stuff about, hey, our guys shopping players, what teams will often hide behind is, well, sure, we'll listen to any deal. We'll listen to anybody. Nobody's untradeable. Ultimately, that means if you're hearing a team is calling about what the value is for their player, like a lot of times they are looking to trade that player. I think there is a distinction in Zach Lowe mentioning that's what the first thing those guys would do, right? That's the first thing they're mentioning, which means that it's a priority. Okay, sure, I would love to know what the value is for LaMelo, but it's not the first thing I'm doing. I'm looking instead to enhance the roster around LaMelo and Brandon. It's not the first thing that I'm doing, which is not what Zach Lowe said that the other guys were saying in front offices elsewhere.
The first thing that I'm doing is finding a cute nickname for Schnall and Plotkin. Maybe Schlotkin. I just want to, because I think if you're Jeff Peterson, it's going to be very heavy to constantly say, Schnall and Plotkin. Let's get up with Schnall and Plotkin. Let's get a meeting with Schnall and Plotkin. I think the first thing you got to do as GM is you got to figure out a way, if you want to call them venture bros, whatever you want to call them, you've got to figure out what that thing is so you don't waste a bunch of time. That's the first thing that I'm doing. But to clean up what I said, because you're right, you have a desire to know what the value of all of your players are around the league. What I'm saying is that it's worth the risk of, some kind of information leaking to find out what the value is for LaMelo Ball right now. Not even with the intention to trade, but just with the intention to know what that value is and to see, and again, to gauge it now, see what this season does for him, and then gauge it again. I'm saying it's worth the risk of that kind of information leaking. It's not worth the risk for Brandon Miller. It's not worth the risk because I think the ceiling, honestly, I think might be higher for Brandon Miller at this point. And I think there are some extenuating issues with ankle and different things with LaMelo Ball where I think the risk is actually worth knowing what that value is. That's what I'm saying.
You want to hear some teams that I think maybe would be interested in trading for LaMelo?
I would love that. Are you going to do that next?
I am indeed. Coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
I will mention those teams. The tease already happened. I will mention those. Plus, we'll have some draft games to play. Doug is bringing not only the mock drafts, but also the draft games because he is so tied up into all of it. That's still to come here on Locked On Hornets. Before we have so much fun in the second segment, I want to tell you that this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, and more, and you can bet it all on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet everything from the Finals MVP to who's going to hit one out of the park. You can visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. Maybe we'd have better luck betting in the summer than the actual regular season because it didn't go so well. But do we plan on bringing back Bet the Buzz for FanDuel, Doug? Is that something we want to do?
Oh, of course. Bet the Buzz. Yeah, I mean, I always love foibles when it comes to FanDuel.
And plus, it's a great catchphrase. I don't want that to go anywhere. FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Once again, FanDuel being America's #1 sports book. We appreciate them for helping us out here on the Locked On Podcast Network. More Locked On Hornets ahead. All right, Doug, maybe a little rapid fiery. I've got some teams that might make sense if you were to do this. I've made it very well known. I'm not interested in that right now. But if you were to do it, some teams that might make sense. I don't know if there's teams that come up in your mind. The first one that came up to me is Minnesota. So if Minnesota is looking to take the next step, they're looking to move off of Karl Anthony Towns. Weird series where we kept shifting back and forth on how good Cat was with Minnesota, but ultimately they need a point guard. That's why they're in the Darius Garland sweepstakes, I think. Or Mike Conley has been good, but do you want somebody else back there? I don't know. Maybe LaMelo, Cat. Maybe that's something that would make sense. But if you're looking for more assets, then Minnesota doesn't have that. They gave it all up in the Rudy Gobert trade. You're talking about 2028 before you start to get some first. So I don't know how interesting that would be, but Minnesota is a name that came to mind. Ultimately, I don't think that would work. You have thoughts on Minnesota?
It would give the Hornets a big that can shoot, but then you'd probably be in the same situation that Minnesota is now in figuring out how to make a Cat Mark Williams or a Cat Klingon or whatever you got there at center or whatever situation you have there. It's probably not the best move for the Hornets.
Exactly. Clippers would be another team.
Oh yeah, give me the name. Give me the name. You know what name? Give me that name.
Paul George.
Oh, yeah, the GOAT.
Yeah, right. Paired with Brandon Miller. If you're looking for assets here for the Clippers, they don't have much. Their incoming draft picks, 2024 second round pick, and then 2030 is the next first round selection they have after everything they've done to enhance that roster. Clippers, I think that would be hard to do. Maybe you're just doing the injury thing. You'd have to give Paul George a lot of money. Who knows? Don't know if he wants to be here, but
and it would go against everything that they've said they want to do, which is build a sustainable. Like you do that, you're after one playoff run that's most likely like 99% not going to end in a finals appearance. And then what's next? I mean, maybe you get a couple more years. I don't know what George's contract situation. I think it's long, but he's not, he's on the backside of his career, and LaMelo, if the ankles hold up, or is on the front side of his career. So, yeah, I don't think the franchise is going to do that. Really, like ideally, you would move him to a team that had significant draft assets, and then you could rebuild around Brandon Miller using those draft assets.
So here are the two teams that fit that mold. These are the two interesting ones. This is where it would get real spicy, okay? The team that is looking to enhance their talent level at the expense of getting rid of future assets, and they would make that next jump because the idea is LaMelo is going to be healthy, and he's going to help that squad as currently constructed. Orlando, who could use some scoring. They could use some half-court initiation. I think, honestly, if you were just like, I don't want to do it, but if you were an NBA fan and you just wanted to see some fun stuff go down, LaMelo to Orlando would be quite interesting, where they do have their first round picks. They have it in 2024, 25, 26, 27. Needless to say, they got their first, and it would help them who they've been going with this Cole Anthony, Markelle Fultz, Jalen Suggs backcourt. LaMelo, very different player than all of them. So that would be quite interesting for Orlando to go all in at the expense of however many draft picks it would take to get him, Orlando would be quite interesting in this conversation.
Yeah, it would be super ideal because if you've looked at some of the 3 to 4 first-round pick trades that have had, I mean, I don't know. That's probably not his haul right now because of the injuries, because he's only been to one All-Star game that, he backed into. This would be way different than like a Rudy Gobert conversation or a Drew Holiday conversation. But just say it's 3 first-rounders and one of them's heavily protected. The multi-first-round picks trades that have happened have been like to Milwaukee and Minnesota, and the team getting the picks back are pretty much guaranteed that those picks are going to be late first-rounders. With Orlando, not guarantee. I mean, you are adding significant talent there, and they do have Paolo Banchero, and Franz Wagner is awesome, but it's not like you're trading him to somebody that has already 2 elite NBA pieces. So that's probably the most ideal, I think.
Yeah, so Magic, you get your first-round picks, and then maybe a Wendell Carter thrown in there at the expensive pick. That would be some interesting stuff. And then the other one, the point guard. Who are the point guard needy teams? There's one team that immediately comes to mind, and it's San Antonio. Pairing LaMelo with Wemby.
That's what we wanted to do. That was our dream.
Yeah, that's right.
That was our dream.
We wanted it to happen in Charlotte. It did not happen.
Before you even say it, I'm axing this because I cannot. That would be too much pain. That you have reached my pain threshold, sir. I cannot take it anymore. I cannot watch that happen.
They have a lot of firsts, Doug. In fact, we could go all Kevin Costner draft day on them and ask for our picks back because the Spurs have the Charlotte 2025 lottery protected first round pick, and they have first going all the way back 2025. They have it in 2026. So those would be the Magic and the Spurs would be the most interesting teams to make something happen if you were hell bent on really shopping LaMelo to see what you could get. Is San Antonio desperate enough to give Wemby help right away in terms of a ball handler, facilitator, shooter? Would make a lot of sense, would hide LaMelo's defensive deficiencies. Boy, oh boy, would that make sense for San Antonio? And it would also make a lot of sense for Orlando. Those would be the 2 first teams I'm calling if indeed I'm shopping LaMelo Ball.
The only thing that would be more painful is if you traded him to New Orleans, moved the team to Seattle, and had Larry Johnson dressed as Grandmama come and kick me in the Doug Funnies. That would be the only. The only
Doug
thing
Funnies.
Doug
I love that. The Doug Funnies and your Skeeter. Oh no!
Leave the Skeeter alone.
Good.
Leave the Skeeter alone. It's been through enough.
Also, the pork chop. Just leave the pork chop alone as well.
Don't mess with the pork chop
either. Buddy. Leave all of it alone, if you ask me. All right, let's actually play some draft games on the other side. We actually did not do rapid fire whatsoever. We did not live up to our promise, which is something we do consistently.
That's our only promise. Our only promise that we live up to is that we don't live up to the promises.
That's right. We will please the tease on the other side. Coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
I promise we'll get to those draft games and maybe dabble in the Seiko Satchel. That's coming up next, final segment. Before we go to the draft games, I want to tell you that this episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. We all carry around different stressors, whether it's big or small. We keep them bottled up, and when we do that, it can start to affect us negatively. Therapy is a safe space to get things off of your chest and to figure out how to work through whatever is weighing you down. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can even switch therapists anytime for no additional charge if you feel the need to. Get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, H-E-L-P, BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA, and you too can get 10% off of your first month. More Locked On Hornets ahead. All right, let's play some draft games. Doug, what do you have cooked up for us today?
All right, so Phony Gavoni over at ESPN, Jonathan Gavoni, as he's known to some other folks, did something that I actually liked. And when he is Phony Gavoni, Walker, is when he's speculating, when he's trying to get the hot goss, when he turns into this sauced reporter. That's when he's Phony Gavoni. When he's doing what he does best, which is scouting talent and telling me who's good at what and who's not good at what, that's how I like my Gavoni. So he did this great write-up for ESPN Plus, and he listed all of these skills that teams need nowadays, and then he listed the best player that in this draft that is associated with that particular skill. So the game is simple. If you could have, Walker, the best player in this draft at one of these skills, and I'm going to read these off quickly, at one of these skills, who should the Hornets want? Really, you're picking a skill, and then I'm going to tell you the player if I did remember to have this article up, and I did, so I can tell you the player. I'm going to read these quickly. Are you ready?
Yep, I'm ready.
Pick and roll finisher, pick and roll playmaker, ball handler, pull-up shooter, spot-up shooter, movement shooter, offensive rebounder, leaper/dunker, defensive playmaker, shot blocker, off-ball defender, on-ball defender, full court defender, clutch player, motor, love a motor, backstory, frame, competitor, or intangibles.
Yeah, there's lots of valuable ones. Ultimately, I'm going to go with what I think are really hard to find at elite levels. And I think I have to go to the shooting.
Okay.
And not spot up shooting. I think I go movement shooting, Doug. Over pull up. I looked at pull up, but I'm going movement shooting as the skill set that I would like most.
Now tell me why. Why now? Because you debated there among the shooting archetypes. Now, why do you think they need a movement shooter more than anything?
I think spot up shooting can probably be found a little more. I guess I don't have any numbers to back that up, but it feels like spot up shooting is the easiest kind of shooting when it comes to also just bringing in a little bit more nuances, whether you're moving, reading screens, or you have the basketball in your hands and then you're pulling up with the basketball already there. You're not assisted. I think those two are really tough. Then when I start to think about specifically the Hornets fit, if this guy isn't going to have the basketball in his hands as much, with LaMelo, Brandon, you have some point guard depth coming in with the second unit, then I would really like the idea of somebody coming off of screens and then fading and just being a good movement shooter with this team feels like something that would be really valuable. So that's how I eventually came up to that. And there is somebody that fits that bill, according to Phony Gavoni, that would be the pick there at number 6. If we wanted to go that route. Did you want to reveal the name because mock drafts are your specialty?
Yes. So I'm going to tell you who you gave up. So best pull-up shooter, according to Phony Gavoni, is Cam Spencer, the shooting guard out of UConn. Mm-hmm. And then the best spot-up shooter is Reed Shepherd out of Kentucky. So those are the two players you gave up. The best movement shooter is a guy that's been recently mocked to the Charlotte Hornets and a guy that we talked about on the last show could very well be a fit if the Hornets wanted someone to contribute right away, and that guy is out of Tennessee. Dalton Connect is your best movement shooter according to Phony Gavoni. Is it the best movement shooter according to ESPN, or not ESPN, WFNZ's college basketball analyst Walker Mail?
Yeah, see, you're asking me if I think he's the best movement shooter? I would say so. It's hard to argue, I guess, with the numbers, but it's funny because I don't know if I would have Dalton Connect up at the top of my wish list. I still like the idea of Stephon Castlemore. Reed Shepherd shooting over 50% from 3 is highly tantalizing, but Connect, despite some of the defensive deficiencies that he has, he does fit. He's bigger than Reed Shepherd, and he's good at movement shooting. He's also older. I do think that matters a little bit, but perhaps not as much. Yeah, it would be a fun pick. And if you like movement shooting and he's giving you that best skill set there, then that's why I would be okay with him at number 6, even if there are some other guys without this test, without this game that we played, I probably would have gone with instead.
So he made 39.7% of his total shots off screen and 36.8% of his threes he made off of screens. And I think getting Mark Williams back and healthy is a big part of this, right? Because when you're talking about LaMelo, you're running him off of like the 1-5 up top, trying to get LaMelo going downhill. You're not really running like him off ball, looking for the ball to be passed to him. Brandon Miller, you might run him off screens, and boy, was he good at it not even with great screen setters. He was great at coming off screens and getting the ball up quickly. But to have a second guy that could do that and connect, that I think you could start alongside Brandon Miller and run both of those guys off screens and have some decoy action, and might open, if you have to respect Connect's ability there, then that might open up some more stuff for Ball and Brandon Miller. I'm telling you, Walker, I might be talking myself into this pick. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm talking myself into Dalton.
And respect Connect, by the way, is right there. We could roll
respect
with that
Connect, the connector, no disconnect. I like it. I'm
Connect
talking myself into
you
this
came
thing.
up with that. That was good. So the other one, though, it's, of course, with defense being a real problem with him, I did look at on-ball defense, and that's where Stephon Castle reigns supreme. What would you have gone with, Doug? I'll flip it. What was the skill set that you would have chosen there after you gave me some of the skill sets to choose from?
Well, you just mentioned it, which is on-ball defender. That would have been my pick, despite me writing Stephon Castle off my big board. He can't get back on. Once I write you off, I'm sorry, I just can't. It doesn't mean the Hornets can't pick you. They might very well pick you. Although, man, I just saw, and here's my obligation to the mock draft today, is I saw that Grind City Media did a mock draft, and they went to all these beat reporters. And I've been on Grind City Media before, and they didn't call me, and I'm a little offended by that. Instead, they went with Rod Boone, which, all right, if you're going to go with somebody besides me, then go with the guy from the Charlotte Observer. That's fine. But Rod Boone selected Reed Shepherd with his 6th pick, and I went, Reed Shepherd, that's interesting with pick number 6, not going Castle there instead. And it's because I looked at the mock draft, and I don't know who they got to represent Washington, but the representative there took Stephon Castle, number 2 overall, instead of Reese Shea. Sarr went 1, and then Castle went number 2. And honestly, man, the more I think about it, and I think Gavoni's right, he is the best on-ball defender. I think he's the best defender, period, in the draft.
Yeah.
And so I know that a lot of mock drafts, like consensus mock draft, would have Castle at 6. But I honestly feel that one of these teams in the top 5 is going to look at their situation and go, we need to improve our defense, and let's take the best defender. And I think Castle for sure is going to go before the Hornets. And so then you're talking about trying to, do you go all the way upgrade your offense, or do you try to find somebody like Connect or like Reed Shepherd, if Reed Shepherd happens to fall, who can improve your offense and also, not improve your defense, but reasonably hold their own defensively. I think both of those guys would make sense. But yeah, man, I mean, on-ball defense, I think if you had asked me before the trade deadline, Walker, I would have said shooting. Got to get some more shooting. But I think they addressed some of those issues at the trade deadline, and now I think for sure it's on-ball defense. Look at the NBA Finals, man. Look at how tough it is to score a basket. Now, I know the Hornets are a long way from the NBA Finals, but if you look across the playoffs, it's, Steve Clifford was right. Like, you gotta be able to defend tenaciously. You got to have guys, not just willing to defend, but willing to attack defensively. That's why Boston is going to win this NBA championship. I'm calling it right now. Well, I know people have been waiting for my NBA Finals prediction, and I'm giving it after they go up 2-0. But Boston's going to win this thing because defense, and the Hornets have no defense. So, of course, they should take Castle. But he's off my big board because he doesn't want to play here.
Yeah, he's going crazy. Sorry, everybody. He's going wild here.
It's draft season.
You know what both Dallas and Boston has outside of Luka, who is
injured white guys.
They have that. We had that. We used to have that. But that didn't work for us. But besides Luka, who gets attacked all the time defensively, both teams have a lot of guys that can do both. You have your centers that can rim run, and Gafford can protect the rim. We have PJ. We know the effort is amped up with Dallas, but he is becoming a two-way player. Derrick Jones Jr., not quite the shooter usually, but did get hot against OKC, and defensively is a good player. You go back to Boston, they've just got, two-way players all over the place and elite defenders with Drew and Derrick. It sucks sacrificing something on one side of the floor, man. And these teams just don't do it as much unless, Luka sacrifices something. One, he actually had been better defensively. And also, the dude is an MVP candidate ever since he stepped foot onto the NBA court. Like, you can be a bad defender. It's tough to find both of those two or those types of guys with that with that skill set on both ends of the floor, and that's what the Hornets are tasked with right now.
It's hard to believe, Walker, but the Hornets as a franchise, they used to have an identity. Now, the first time that they started winning, in your early 90s run that included Muggsy, Zoe, and LJ, they did have some defensive toughness, but they made their money on getting up and down the court in an era where you didn't really get up and down the court as much. And so that was a run and gun offensive team. And then as they had to trade Zoe, they had to trade LJ away, and they pivoted. And instead of trying to replace that run and gun, they said, no, we're going to become a defensive nasty team with, one guy in Glenn Rice that can light it up offensively. And they took that to the extreme with those early aughts teams that almost made an Eastern Conference Finals. Those teams were nasty defensively, and they as you got into the early aughts, those teams couldn't score. But my point is, those teams had an identity, and you get an identity by drafting and trading and free agency, acquiring players that do certain things, and yeah, you have some outliers that can supplement particular things that you need, shooting or rebounding or whatever, but everybody buys into the central message of the team, and that's how you build an identity. And I'm hoping that a combination of Charles Lee and Jeff Peterson with proper, bank motivation from Schnall and Plotkin can allow this team to start pursuing whatever identity that is. And if they want it to be defensive nastiness and toughness, Castle's that to a T, man.
Last thing I was looking up, the last time they had an identity, in my opinion, they had some offensive identity with James Borrego just getting up and down the floor. But the last time they had success, that 2015-16 year, top 10 in defensive rating. They were number 9 in the regular season and low turnover offensively. They weren't going to wow you offensively, but they defended their ass off and they didn't turn the ball over. That was what Steve Clifford told you the identity was. That's what they could go back to when things went crazy, and that's how they were able to win 48 games and really be up competing for like a top 4 spot. Remember, it was all jumbled up with that 3 through 6 team there when everybody was competing for home court advantage.
That team was a clutch team. That team never gave up. I mean, they could be down 15-20 at the beginning of a fourth quarter and have a chance to win. A lot of that was the heart of the team in Kemba Walker. A lot of it was that you added Jeremy Lin, and Jeremy Lin gave them an offensive firecracker that could light it up in any particular quarter. But if you look at sort of not just that year, but that team as they built their identity along the way, it was guys who had weaknesses that were willing to do what it took to improve those weaknesses just enough to make sure that the whole unit didn't make mistakes defensively or offensively. Like, they weren't an elite defensive team like Boston. They weren't an elite offensive team like Dallas, but they were able to give just enough on both ends of the floor. But that was a lot of heart and soul from a combination of like players who have been there for a while and players they acquired. They really kind of got some flash in the pan. And then you had a lot of maturity on that team as well from guys like Marvin Williams. All of those things this team currently lacks, although they've got some little seedlings in Brandon Miller and Grant Williams now. Mm-hmm. Again, it's some of the ingredients are there. But, if they decide, oh, well, we've got it all now, like Mitch Kupchak has been doing for years, and Michael Jordan, if they look at it the same way and say, no, we've got all the ingredients, we're good, they just need to catch fire. If they do that, instead of actually going out and finding these particular needs and filling them with players that have that tenacity, that have that defensive motivation, then, we're going to be sitting here another year from now with the same question: what is this team's identity?
Yeah, top 10 offense and defense that year, which Steve Clifford preached constantly. Hopefully we can get back to those days. That'll do it for Locked On Hornets. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free and available anywhere you get your pods, including YouTube. So check us out there. But also, we're still doing the Audible Medium thing. Find Doug on his Substack, everyhornetsboxscore.com. Listen to me, WFNZ, every weekday from 12 to 3 p.m. on Wes and Walker. Have a great rest of your day. We'll be back with you tomorrow.
Bye.